but his hand slipped somewhere forbidden, though the cowboy was only cleaning her wound. The sun was slowly sinking behind the wide-open land, painting the sky in soft orange and dusty pink colors. The cowboy had been riding all day, checking fences and cattle across the rough land. His life was simple and quiet. He spoke little, trusted his horse more than most people, and believed that hard work was the best way to live. Out here, far from towns and crowded places, peace usually came easy. As he guided his horse back toward the ranch, something unusual caught his eye, near a rocky slope. A horse stood alone, breathing heavily, its reins dragging in the dirt. That was never a good sign. The cowboy slowed down, his instincts telling him something was wrong. He got off his horse and looked around carefully. That was when he saw her. She lay on the ground a few steps away, her body twisted awkwardly, her face pale and tight with pain. Dust clung to her clothes, and a dark stain spread near her leg where she had been injured. She was unconscious, or at least too weak to move. For a moment the cowboy froze. He wasn't used to seeing people out here, especially not someone hurt this badly. He quickly pushed his thoughts aside and moved closer. He checked her breathing first, relieved to feel steady breaths. The horse must have thrown her. These lands were unforgiving, and one wrong step could lead to disaster. He knew there was no doctor nearby, and riding to town would take hours, time she clearly didn't have. The cowboy acted the only way he knew how. Carefully, gently, he lifted her and brought her back to his ranch. The ride was slow and careful, every step measured so he wouldn't make her pain worse. The woman stirred slightly, letting out a soft sound, but she didn't fully wake. By the time they reached the small wooden house, the sky had darkened and the first stars were beginning to appear. He laid her down on a clean bed, the only bed he had, and lit a lamp to see better. The warm light filled the room, chasing away the shadows but not the worry sitting heavy in his chest. He wasn't a doctor, but growing up on the range had taught him some basic first aid. Injuries happened often out here. He washed his hands carefully, moving slowly, trying not to panic. The woman's leg was badly scraped and bleeding, and dirt had worked its way into the wound. Leaving it like that would only make things worse. As he cleaned the area, she slowly opened her eyes. Confusion filled her expression when she saw a stranger standing over her. Her body tensed, and fear flashed across her face. "Easy," he said softly, keeping his voice calm. "You fell. You're hurt. I'm just trying to help." She tried to move, but winced sharply, the pain stopping her. Her breathing grew fast and shallow. Being alone, injured, and surrounded by an unfamiliar place made her fear grow stronger. She didn't know who this man was or what he wanted. The cowboy noticed her fear immediately. He stepped back a little, giving her space, and explained where she was and what had happened. His words were simple and honest. Still, fear is hard to quiet, especially when pain clouds the mind. He returned to cleaning the wound, focusing carefully on removing dirt and stopping the bleeding. His hands were rough from years of work, but his touch was gentle. He moved slowly, knowing every movement mattered. Outside, the wind brushed against the walls, and the silence of the open land pressed in around them. The woman clenched her fists as pain shot through her leg. Every touch felt sharper than it probably was. Her thoughts raced, and her heart pounded loudly in her chest. She tried to stay calm, but fear whispered in her mind, making her see danger where there was none. The cowboy shifted his position slightly so he could see the injury better. It was an innocent movement, one meant to help him clean the wound properly, but in that moment, pain, fear, and confusion mixed together in her mind. Her body stiffened. She pulled back suddenly, her eyes wide. Her breathing grew uneven, and her voice shook as she spoke. The cowboy froze, not understanding what he had done wrong. He immediately pulled his hands away, stepping back again. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I didn't mean... I was just trying to clean the wound." The room felt tense and heavy. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The woman's thoughts were tangled, her fear louder than reason. She turned her face away, tears quietly forming in her eyes, not from what had happened, but from the fear of what she thought might have happened. The cowboy stood there, unsure of what to do next. He felt shame crawl into his chest, even though he knew his intentions were clean. He hated the idea that his help had caused fear instead of comfort. Out here, reputation and trust mattered more than anything. He carefully placed the cleaning supplies down and backed away fully, making sure she could see he meant no harm. He told her he would wait outside and that she could call him if she needed anything. His voice stayed steady, though inside he felt shaken. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, he leaned against the wooden post and stared out at the dark land. Stars filled the sky, distant and silent. He had helped injured people before, but never like this. Never with fear and misunderstanding standing between them. Inside the house, the woman lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her leg throbbed, but her mind hurt more. She replayed the moment again and again, unsure of what was real and what fear had added. She didn't know whether to trust him or not, and that uncertainty scared her deeply. Outside, the cowboy stayed awake all night, listening for any sound from inside. He didn't sleep. His thoughts circled around one question: how helping someone could turn into something so wrong so quickly. The night passed slowly, filled with silence, worry, and unspoken tension. Neither of them knew that this single moment would change both of their lives in ways they could never have imagined. Morning arrived slowly on the open land. Pale sunlight slipped through the cracks of the wooden house, touching the floor and walls with soft light. The cowboy had not slept. He was still sitting outside, wrapped in his jacket, his back against the post. The sounds of birds waking up filled the air, but his mind remained heavy and restless. Inside, the woman opened her eyes and realized the night had passed. Her leg ached deeply, and every small movement reminded her of the injury. But the pain in her thoughts was stronger. Fear still lingered, even though nothing else had happened. She remembered the man stepping away, the way his voice had shaken when he apologized. That memory didn't match the danger she had imagined. She slowly pushed herself up, holding her breath as pain shot through her leg. The room looked simple and clean. There were no signs of struggle, no broken things, no feeling of threat. Only quiet. She noticed the bandages placed nearby, neatly arranged, untouched after the night before. For a long moment she just sat there, listening. She expected to hear footsteps or a voice, but there was nothing. Slowly, doubt crept into her fear. Had she misunderstood? Pain had made her weak, fear had made her suspicious, and being alone with a stranger had pushed her mind toward the worst possibility. Outside, the cowboy finally heard movement. He stood up quickly, unsure whether to come in or stay back. He didn't want to scare her again. After a few seconds, the door opened slightly. The woman stood there, leaning on the frame for support. Their eyes met briefly, then both looked away. I need water," she said quietly. "Of course," he replied, moving slowly toward the table where a jug sat. He kept his distance, making sure every movement was clear and calm. He handed her the cup, careful not to touch her hand. She drank slowly, then returned the cup. The silence between them felt thick, filled with things neither knew how to say. "I'll check your leg," he said gently. "Only if you're okay with it." She hesitated, then nodded. "Just tell me what you're doing." "I will," he promised. He knelt a short distance away, explaining every step before he took it. His voice was steady, but inside, fear twisted his stomach. One wrong move, one wrong word, and things could fall apart again. As he cleaned and rewrapped the wound, she watched closely. This time there was no sudden movement, no confusion. She noticed how careful he was, how he avoided unnecessary contact, how focused he remained on helping her heal. Slowly, her breathing eased. "I think the pain made me panic," she said quietly, not looking at him. "Pain can do that." "I didn't mean to," her voice broke. "I didn't know what to think." He finished the bandage and stood up, stepping back. "I understand," he said, though a part of him still felt deeply hurt. Later that day, he helped her sit outside in the shade. He cooked a simple meal and left it nearby so she could eat without feeling watched. Everything he did showed care, but also distance. He was protecting both of them, from misunderstanding, from more harm. By afternoon, a neighbor stopped by the ranch. The cowboy had asked him earlier to bring supplies and help arrange transport to town. The neighbor noticed the woman's injury and asked questions. The cowboy answered honestly but briefly. The woman stayed quiet, unsure of what to say. Later, when the neighbor left, the woman realized something had changed. She could feel it. The cowboy was quieter than before, his eyes avoiding hers more often. A heavy weight settled in her chest. By the next morning, arrangements were made to take her to town. The cowboy helped her onto the wagon carefully, making sure she was comfortable. As they traveled, people stared. News traveled fast in small places, and curiosity often turned into judgment. Whispers followed them when they arrived. Some people looked at the woman with concern. Others looked at the cowboy with suspicion. He felt their eyes, sharp and cold, cutting into his back. A few quiet questions were asked. Simple ones at first, then more careful ones. The woman heard the tone shift. She realized the story being built around them was not the truth, but a shadow of it, twisted by fear and guessing. The cowboy answered calmly, but fewer people listened. Once doubt takes root, it spreads quickly. That night, alone in a small room provided by a local family, the woman couldn't sleep. She replayed everything again. The accident. Waking up, The pain, the fear, the moment she pulled away, and the look on his face after. She finally understood what had happened. Nothing wrong had been done to her, but something wrong was happening to him now. The next day, she overheard two people talking outside her door. Their words were quiet, but clear enough. They spoke of warning others, of being careful, of the cowboy. Her chest tightened. Guilt washed over her, heavy and sharp. Her silence had allowed a lie to grow, not a spoken lie, but one made from misunderstanding. She knew then that staying quiet would cause real harm. Back at the ranch, the cowboy sat alone once again. The land that once brought peace now felt empty. He didn't know what people were saying, only that fewer nodded to him now, fewer trusted him. He had done nothing wrong, yet everything felt wrong. Both of them lay awake that night, miles apart, thinking about the same moment, the moment when fear spoke louder than truth. And both knew that something had to change. Days passed, but the feeling of unease did not leave. The cowboy returned to his routine, waking before sunrise, tending to his land and animals like he always had. From the outside, nothing seemed different, but inside him, everything had changed. The wide land that once felt free now felt heavy and watchful, as if the silence itself carried judgment. When he rode into town to buy supplies, the change became clearer. People who once greeted him with nods and easy smiles now kept their distance. Conversations stopped when he walked by. Some looked at him with doubt, others with quiet suspicion. No one said anything directly, but the space they left between themselves and him spoke louder than words. He paid for his supplies quickly and left without lingering. The sound of his horse's hooves echoed against the dirt road, slower than usual. He had lived an honest life, and that honesty had always been enough. Now, for the first time, it felt like honesty was not enough at all. Back at the ranch, the nights were the hardest. Sleep came in short pieces, broken by thoughts he could not escape. He replayed every moment in his mind, searching for something he had missed, something he could have done differently. The more he thought, the more helpless he felt. He stopped visiting town unless absolutely necessary. He worked longer hours, keeping himself busy to quiet his thoughts. But no amount of work could fix the damage to his name. Meanwhile, the woman stayed in town to recover. Her leg was healing slowly, and with every passing day, her guilt grew heavier. She noticed how people spoke around her, how careful they were with their words, how quickly they filled the silence with assumptions. At first she stayed quiet, unsure of how to speak up without making things worse, but silence began to feel like a choice she could no longer defend. She remembered how he had stepped back, how he had waited outside all night, how he had treated her with respect even when fear stood between them. The truth was clear to her now. Fear had shaped her reaction, and misunderstanding had shaped the story that followed. One afternoon, she overheard someone say the cowboy should not be trusted anymore. The words struck her harder than any pain she had felt during the accident. That was the moment she knew she could not stay quiet. She asked to speak with a few people she trusted. Her voice shook as she explained what really happened. She spoke slowly, carefully, choosing honesty over comfort. At first, some listened with doubt. Others looked surprised. But she kept speaking, refusing to let fear twist the truth again. Word spread, but this time, it spread differently. Some people began to question the earlier whispers. Some felt ashamed for judging too quickly. Others remained unsure, holding on to doubt because letting go of it meant admitting they had been wrong. The cowboy noticed small changes. A nod returned here and there, a greeting that was short but polite. It wasn't enough to restore peace, but it was enough to let him breathe a little easier. One evening, the woman finally gathered the courage to visit the ranch. The journey felt longer than it was. Her heart raced as she saw the familiar wooden house come into view. When she stepped down from the wagon, she stood still for a moment, gathering her strength. He noticed her from a distance and froze. He hadn't expected to see her again. 100 thoughts rushed through his mind, none of them clear. She walked toward him slowly, stopping a few steps away. "I came to tell you the truth," she said. "To everyone. I should have done it sooner." He looked at the land, then back at her. "Thank you," he finally said. His voice was calm but tired. "I'm sorry," she added, "for letting fear speak for me." He nodded. Fear can be loud. They stood in silence, not awkward this time, but thoughtful. There was no anger between them, only understanding shaped by hardship. After she left, the cowboy felt something shift inside him. The weight wasn't gone, but it was lighter. Healing, he realized, was not sudden. It came in slow steps, just like trust. Over the following weeks, life began to settle. The town did not fully forget, but it learned to listen. The cowboy returned to town more often, no longer hiding from the looks. Some people apologized quietly. Others simply moved on. He accepted what he could and let go of what he couldn't control. The land welcomed him back the way it always had, steady and patient. The woman eventually left town carrying more than a healed leg with her. She carried a lesson she would never forget, that silence can harm just as much as words, and the truth matters most when it is hardest to speak. Both lives moved forward, shaped by a moment neither of them had planned, but both would remember. And though the misunderstanding had left marks, it had also taught them the value of courage, honesty, and choosing understanding over fear. Time moved on, but the past did not disappear easily. Even as the truth slowly made its way through the town, its shadow still followed the cowboy. Trust, once cracked, does not repair itself overnight. Some people believed the woman's words right away. Others accepted them quietly. A few still held on to doubt, not because they believed he had done wrong, but because uncertainty had become easier than truth. The cowboy learned to live with this mixed reaction. He stopped expecting quick answers from people. Instead, he focused on what he could control: his work, his land, and his own sense of right and wrong. Every morning he rose before the sun, letting routine bring calm to his thoughts. The steady rhythm of ranch life gave him balance when his mind tried to wander back to painful memories. One afternoon, a letter arrived at the ranch. He rarely received letters, and seeing his name written carefully on the envelope stirred a quiet curiosity. He opened it slowly, recognizing the handwriting at once. It was from the woman. She wrote honestly, without excuses. She spoke about her recovery, about the nights she spent awake thinking about fear and silence. She explained how hard it had been to speak up, and how necessary it had become. She did not ask for forgiveness. She only wanted him to know that she was still telling the truth wherever she went. The cowboy folded the letter and placed it on the table. For a long time, he simply sat there. Reading her words did not erase what had happened, but brought clarity. It reminded him that the story had two sides, both shaped by pain and misunderstanding, not bad intent. Meanwhile, the town faced its own quiet reckoning. People began to reflect on how quickly they had judged, how easily they had filled silence with guesses. No meetings were held, no speeches were made. Change came through small moments. Gentler conversations, fewer whispers, more listening. One evening, the town's doctor visited the ranch. He had treated the woman's injury and knew the truth from the beginning. Sitting at the table, he spoke plainly. "You did what anyone would have done," the doctor said. "Sometimes people fear what they don't understand." He did not need reassurance, but hearing it still mattered. Later that week, the woman returned to town briefly for a follow-up visit. This time, she did not stay quiet. When questions arose, she answered them calmly and clearly. She corrected wrong ideas without anger. She spoke with confidence shaped by reflection, not fear. Some people apologized to her for pressing her, for drawing conclusions too fast. Others thanked her for speaking honestly. Through her words, the story finally found balance. The cowboy noticed the difference almost immediately. When he rode into town, people greeted him openly again. Conversations no longer stopped when he approached. A shopkeeper offered him coffee. A neighbor invited him to sit and talk. These were small things, but they carried weight. Still, healing did not erase the memory. The cowboy knew he would always remember how quickly trust could shift, how fragile reputation could be. But he also learned something valuable. Truth does not always shout. Sometimes it waits for courage. One afternoon, while repairing a fence near the edge of his land, he saw a wagon approaching. It stopped nearby, and the woman stepped down. She walked carefully, her legs still stiff but strong enough to carry her. "I wanted to say goodbye properly," she said. He set his tools aside and listened. "I'll be leaving for good this time," she continued. "But I wanted you to know that I won't let the truth fade. Not here. Not anywhere." He looked at her, seeing not fear this time, but strength shaped by experience. "Thank you," he said simply. They stood together in the quiet, watching the land stretch endlessly before them. There was no bitterness between them, only understanding. The moment that had once caused pain now stood as a lesson neither would forget. As she left, the cowboy felt something settle inside him. The story no longer felt unfinished. It had found its shape, not perfect, not painless, but honest. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned gold, the cowboy sat outside his house, thinking about how life changes in moments we never expect. He understood now that doing the right thing does not always bring immediate reward. Sometimes it brings challenge first. But in the end, truth has a way of standing tall, even after being bent by fear. The land remained wide and quiet, unchanged by human misunderstanding. And as the stars appeared one by one, The cowboy felt at peace, not because the past was forgotten, but because it had been faced. Seasons changed quietly on the open land. The dry heat softened into cooler days, and the sky seemed wider than ever. Life did not stop for anyone, not even after moments that felt like they might break everything. The cowboy continued his work, riding the fences, caring for the animals, and living the way he always had. But something inside him had shifted for good. The town slowly returned to its usual rhythm. People spoke freely again. Laughter returned to familiar places, and the heavy silence that once followed him faded. It was not forgotten, but it was no longer the center of every thought. Trust had not returned all at once, but it returned steadily, built on daily actions rather than words. The cowboy noticed the change most in small moments. A friendly wave from a distance, a neighbor stopping to talk instead of walking past, an invitation to share a meal. These gestures mattered more than apologies. They told him that people were ready to move forward. Still, the experience had left its mark. He had learned how fragile peace could be, how quickly fear could shape a story. He no longer took trust for granted. Instead, he treated it like the land, something that needed care, patience, and respect. One evening, while the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in warm colors, the cowboy sat on his porch and reflected on everything that had happened. He realized that the hardest part had not been the misunderstanding itself, but the silence that followed it. Silence had allowed fear to grow, but honesty had slowly pulled it back. Far from the ranch, the woman was building a new chapter of her life. Her leg had healed, but the lesson remained with her every day. She spoke more carefully now, listened more closely, and trusted understanding over quick judgment. The experience had changed how she saw people and herself. From time to time, she sent letters to the cowboy. They were simple and thoughtful, never reopening old wounds, never forcing the past to relive itself. They spoke of weather, travel, and small moments that mattered. Their connection was no longer tied to pain, but to growth. The cowboy always replied. His letters were brief, honest, and calm. There was no bitterness in his words, only quiet respect. One day, a young traveler passed through the ranch, injured after a long journey. The cowboy helped without hesitation, using the same care he always had. This time, there was no fear, no misunderstanding, only gratitude. As the traveler left safely, the cowboy felt something he had not felt in a long time. Confidence. Not the loud kind, but the steady kind that comes from knowing who you are, even when others doubt. The land stretched endlessly around him, unchanged and patient. It had seen storms, droughts, and long years of silence, and it had endured. Watching it, the cowboy understood that people, too, could endure misunderstandings and still stand strong. Months later, the woman returned briefly to the area on her travels. She did not come to reopen the past, but to close it properly. They met once more near the edge of the land, not as people bound by fear, but as two individuals who had learned something important. "I'm glad you kept being who you are," she said. He nodded. "I'm glad you spoke when it mattered." There was no need to say more. They parted ways with peace in their hearts, knowing that their lives had crossed for a reason. The misunderstanding that once threatened to ruin everything had instead taught them the value of truth, patience, and courage. As the years passed, the story became quieter, less dramatic, and more real. It was no longer a tale of fear or doubt, but of learning and growth. People remembered it not as something dark, but as a reminder of how easily stories can twist and how powerful honesty can be. Cowboy grew older, but his values stayed the same. He continued to help when help was needed, speak plainly, and live with integrity. The land remained his companion, offering silence when words failed and strength when life tested him. In the end, nothing extraordinary happened, and that was the beauty of it. Life went on. The misunderstanding faded into memory, but the lessons stayed alive. Fear can change how we see things. Silence can shape lies, but truth, spoken with courage, has a way of finding its place, even if it takes time. And under the wide sky, with the land stretching endlessly forward, the cowboy lived on, steady, honest, and at peace.